Okay, so I've got this one religious friend, and that's an exhaustive list. Just the one, really. I mean, that's not actually true. I've got a lot of friends that would tell you they're Christian, or knowing my weird ass friend, something a hippie found in an encyclopedia of mythology when he was coming down from mushrooms like a satru. And I definitely have other friends that believe in God. So in that sense, I've got a lot of religious friends. Hell, some of my best friends are religious, but I've got one for whom religion is important. She's not like a regular churchgoer, but she has been on and off at various times in her life. She's been on a mission trip to South America. She prays. She could wind up a weekly church attendee again at the drop of the hat. What's more, she's average American Christian. So when called upon to justify her belief in God, she reaches not for the Kalam cosmological argument, but rather for a headline she's pretty sure she saw once where they actually found the ruins of the Garden of Eden. And needless to say, she doesn't really understand what it is that I do for a living, and not just because she doesn't know what a podcast is. She has enough trouble believing that there's a person who's kind and good and an atheist, let alone devotes their lives to that, right? So when I say stuff like, yeah, I'm going to be in an atheist protest this weekend, her mental picture is a bunch of us standing outside a church somewhere harassing people on their way into Sunday services with derogatory slogans and banners, I guess. And as wrong as it is, I see how she gets there. That is what a Christian would be doing at a Christian protest, I guess. Now, I've tried to explain the atheist position to her, but we never even get close. Right? Not because she doesn't listen or refuses to talk about it or anything like that. She simply doesn't know enough about her faith to understand why it pisses me off. Right? Like when I try to explain an issue I have with religion, I find myself in perpetual reverse, constantly having to backtrack to explain what the hell I'm even talking about. Of course, after the first couple of congenial but pointless exchanges along those lines, we've fallen into a sort of a debate detente. Right? We see each other pretty often, and when we do, we generally do that polite dance of ignorance, but neither of us are the types to shy away from our opinions, so when the subject comes up, as it inevitably does from time to time, we often find ourselves in a game of rhetorical chicken. Let me give you a recent example, right? So we're talking about something or another, and the story of Noah's Ark comes up. Like it's like the other side of an analogy or something, but somehow it turns into the subject of the damn conversation. And my friend explains that she doesn't actually believe the story in the Bible is literally true, which is convenient. Her Bible likes to shift in and out of trueness as it becomes convenient to the point that she's making. But she insists something like that probably happened. Now, I'm dying to dig into this, so I ask her what something like that would be. And she says that she does believe a big flood really did happen and somebody escaped from it on a boat and had a bunch of animals on board. And sure, maybe he didn't know the flood was coming, but maybe he suspected it. And as unremarkable a story as this has now become, it's still probably wrong. Yeah, I mean, all she's claiming is that there was a guy on a boat with some chickens and a cow once, and then there was a flood, which it seems pretty likely until you consider the size of boats back then. Sure, like maybe the king of something would be tooling around with cows on his fucking boat, but this is a story written around the 5th century BCE. They didn't exactly have tankers. But even if it did happen, what she's saying is that the story had a kernel of truth because floods are a real thing and so are boats. Which, as I pointed out at the time, only makes it as true as The Wizard of Oz, since tornadoes and houses also exist. And then, upon realizing how unremarkable she'd made the story, she added that she also thinks it was like a global flood, though, right? Maybe not enough to cover the Himalayas, but high enough that most civilizations got wiped out. Now, I could have turned to archaeology here, or history, or sociology, but I turned to math. So I whip out my phone. I start calculating how much water it would take to even raise the sea levels by like 5 feet globally. And then I asked her where all that water went, or, barring that, where the planetoid that was dipped into the Pacific Ocean went. But of course, by then, the biblical story had shifted back into being true, so she told me God can just make and take away as much water as he wants. And yes, this was a frustrating conversation. And yes, I was composing this diatribe as she was making her convoluted points, but I wanted to share it with you, not just because it was fucking stupid and I wanted to vent, but because it's important to remember that when you argue with Christians, it's usually this that you're arguing with. You know, not well thought out arguments, but rather desperate intellectual flailings that aren't designed to dissuade the atheist as much as dismiss the atheist. Hell, I had to remind her partway through the argument that Cain and Abel were Adam's sons, not Noah's. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't arm ourselves against the good arguments. We just shouldn't do so at the expense of the dumb ones. I saw another one of those surveys making its way around social media this week that demonstrates once more how much more we know about religion than religious people. And once again, religious people are shocked by it. Us, not so much. And sure, part of that's because we've seen the previous 1,300 studies that showed those exact same results. But some of it's also because we've argued with fucking Christians before. Right? And we've had to politely explain to them what they believe before we could impolitely explain why it was wrong. You know, our focus as a movement for so long has been to explain atheism, and that makes a lot of sense. Religious people are generally scared of atheism, and before we can start trying to coax them over to our side of the fence, we've got to convince them that fence isn't electrified. I get that. It makes a lot of sense, but some people won't listen to that. Some people shut down as soon as you mention or even imply the A word. And besides, we might not have to explain atheism to tempt Christians over. Sometimes it's enough just to explain Christianity.